January 26, 1948. A well-dressed man steps into a bank branch in Toshima Ward, Tokyo, shortly after the bank has closed to the public. He says he's a government health official. He says a dysentery outbreak is moving through the neighborhood, and everyone in the room, every single employee, needs to take preventive medicine immediately. 16 people comply. 12 of them are dead within the hour. The man takes the cash from the vault, folds it into his coat, and walks out the door. What follows is one of the most contested criminal cases in Japanese history. A case where the official verdict and the probable truth may be very different things, and where the shadow of one of Japan's darkest wartime secrets reaches all the way into the conviction. Japan in January 1948 was a country rebuilding itself from nothing. World War II had ended 2.5 years earlier. The Allied occupation, centered on General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters in Tokyo, controlled nearly every dimension of daily life. Food rationing was in effect. The black market was the only market that felt real. Tokyo, firebombed nearly flat in March 1945, was still being reconstructed, block by block. Into this dislocated city came a crime unlike anything the Tokyo Metropolitan Police had seen. The Teikoku Bank, its name means Imperial Bank, had a branch in the Shiinamachi neighborhood of Toshima Ward in western Tokyo. On January 26, 1948, in the mid-afternoon, just after the branch had closed its doors to customers for the day, a middle-aged man in a western suit arrived. He was neat in appearance and unhurried. He wore a name tag. He presented himself to the branch manager as Tajiro Yamaguchi, a public health official from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. He said he was operating under orders from General Headquarters, MacArthur's Occupation Administration. His message was urgent. A group of American soldiers had recently passed through the area, he explained, and there was now a confirmed dysentery outbreak nearby. Every member of the bank's staff needed to take preventive medicine immediately. He had it with him. 16 employees were in the branch. Not one of them questioned him. In post-war occupied Tokyo, a uniformed official claiming to act on GHQ orders was not someone you refused. Disease prevention campaigns had been real, visible, and recently conducted in that very part of the city. The request seemed, in that moment, entirely plausible. The man set out small cups. He administered what he described as a first medicine, a clear or lightly colored liquid. He told the employees they needed to follow it quickly with a second medicine to ensure absorption. They drank both doses without hesitation. Within minutes, people began collapsing. The convulsions came fast. Employees fell from their chairs onto the floor against each other. 12 of the 16 died of poisoning. The exact compound used has been debated ever since the day of the attack, but the effects were consistent with a cyanide-based substance. 4 people survived. Some accounts suggest that a small number had consumed slightly less than the others or managed to spit some of the liquid out before swallowing fully. The man, meanwhile, walked to the back of the bank. He collected approximately 164,400 yen in cash from the vault and also took a check worth 17,400 yen. Then he left. He had been in the branch for perhaps 15 minutes. When the police arrived, they found 12 people dead and 4 barely alive. They also found something else. The man had left behind 2 business cards. Cards bearing the names of real public health officials who worked for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. When those officials were tracked down, they had no knowledge of anything that had happened at Shiinamachi. What investigators gradually pieced together was that January 26th was not the first time. The perpetrator had rehearsed. According to accounts established during the subsequent investigation, a man matching the general description had used the same method at the Yasuda Bank branch in Ebara, Shinagawa Ward, in October 1947, posing as a health official, administering what he called preventive medicine. Nobody died in that incident. Several employees reportedly fell ill. A similar incident allegedly occurred at the Mitsubishi Bank's Nakai branch in Shinjuku Ward on January 19, 1948, exactly 1 week before Shiinamachi. Again, no deaths. These are documented in the investigative record, though it's said that the connections between all 3 incidents were not fully established until after the Teikoku Bank attack. The pattern of escalation is striking. Someone was calibrating, adjusting the dose, refining the approach. In the final week between the Mitsubishi Bank visit and the Teikoku bank attack, they got the concentration right. The question of what the poison actually was has never been settled to everyone's satisfaction. Prosecutors argued potassium cyanide, cheap, obtainable, widely used in wartime industries, including photographic processing, an industry Hirasawa was later linked to. But several chemists and pharmacologists who reviewed the case over the following decades raised a different possibility, that the compound was acetone cyanide, sometimes called acetone cyanohydrin, which releases hydrogen cyanide as it metabolizes in the body. The distinction matters because acetone cyanide was largely inaccessible to ordinary civilians in 1948 Japan. It was, however, available to certain former military scientists, particularly those who had worked on Japan's biological and chemical warfare programs during the war. As for the business cards, police traced them to public health campaigns that had been conducted in Tokyo in the months following the occupation's start. Real officials had distributed cards to citizens during those campaigns. To have obtained those specific cards, the perpetrator must have attended one of those campaigns in person and collected them. It's said that investigators identified hundreds of people who had participated. One of them was a 56-year-old tempera painter from Hokkaido named Sadamichi Hirasawa. Police also found that Hirasawa had come into an unusual amount of money in the period around the attack, spending patterns that stood out against his normal financial life. He was arrested on August 21, 1948, in Otaru, Hokkaido, 7 months after the killings. After extensive interrogation, lasting several months by most accounts, Hirasawa confessed. He was convicted of all 12 murders by the Tokyo District Court in 1950 and sentenced to death. He retracted his confession almost immediately. He spent the rest of his life saying he had not been there. If the motive was robbery, and the prosecution's argument was essentially that, then the Teikoku bank affair was a brilliantly cold-blooded plan to take money from a bank without conventional confrontation. No gun, no threat, no violence visible to anyone outside the building. Just a false identity and a toxic substance that created the appearance of a medical emergency after the perpetrator was already gone. The stolen amount, 164,400 yen in cash plus a check, was not a fortune even by 1948 standards. But in a city where people queued for rationed rice and many families survived on informal arrangements, it was real money. Tokyo in the immediate post-war years had been stripped of industrial capacity, and much of the pre-war middle class had been effectively erased. The circumstances that could produce a calculated, practiced crime of this kind, desperation or the knowledge that opportunity existed and that the surveillance conditions were weak, were broadly present. The method, however, tells us something beyond simple need. This was not opportunistic. The choice of a public health cover story was precise. Occupation Japan had real disease outbreaks, real GHQ-mandated health campaigns, and a culture of deference to official authority that the killer understood and exploited. The earlier bank visits were not coincidental. They were field work. Set aside for a moment the question of guilt. Focus on the psychology of the crime itself, because it's unusual even within the category of premeditated murder. Whoever committed the Teikoku bank killings was not acting in anger. There was no outburst, no breakdown, no visible emotional distress. What the attack required, and what every witness account confirms, was theatrical calm. A composed, authoritative performance delivered to 16 people at once, sustained without visible nervousness, timed with enough precision to allow for both doses to be administered before the first deaths began. The rehearsal visits make this stranger, not simpler. The perpetrator practiced not just the dosage, but the role. They returned to the method until it produced the result they wanted. That is not the behavior of a person acting from rage or desperation. That is the behavior of a person who approached mass killing as a technical problem. This is precisely why the Unit 731 theory has remained so persistent for so long. Unit 731, designated the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, was the Imperial Japanese Army's secret biological and chemical warfare division based in Harbin, Manchuria. Its members had conducted experiments on human subjects in controlled conditions. They had administered poisons, observed the effects, and in some cases framed those administrations as medical treatment. The members of Unit 731 had, in the most literal and terrible sense, practiced exactly this. In 1947, General MacArthur granted immunity from war crimes prosecution to the members of Unit 731, including its commanding officer, General Shiro Ishii. In exchange, the United States received the unit's experimental data. Dozens of former military scientists re-entered Japanese civilian life under this arrangement, their wartime work officially unexamined. It's alleged, though this has never been officially confirmed, that when certain investigators began developing leads pointing toward former Unit 731 members as plausible perpetrators of the Teikoku bank attack, those lines of inquiry were shut down by occupation authorities unwilling to expose the immunity arrangement. What can be said without allegation is that no former Unit 731 member was ever formally investigated for the crime. The novelist Seicho Matsumoto explored this argument extensively in his 1960 work, Nihon no Kuroi Kiri, Black Mist over Japan, contending that the real perpetrator was a former biological warfare scientist protected by MacArthur's deal, and that Hirasawa was convicted in his place. Matsumoto's theory has not been officially confirmed and may never be. Every person who could have known the truth with certainty is now dead. What can be confirmed is the record of what happened to Sadamichi Hirasawa after his conviction. He appealed to the Tokyo High Court in 1951 and lost. He appealed to the Supreme Court in 1955 and lost. He filed 29 separate requests for retrial over the following decades. All 29 were rejected. Not a single justice minister, across successive governments spanning 4 decades, was willing to sign the execution warrant. Under Japanese law, the minister must personally authorize each execution. The official silence around Hirasawa's case was never explained, but it was sustained for 37 years. He was transferred from Sendai prison to a prison hospital in Hachioji, Kanagawa, in his final years, as his health declined. He died there of pneumonia on May 10, 1987. He was 95 years old. He had been convicted of 12 murders he denied committing. Spent more than 3 decades waiting for a hanging, no one would authorize, and outlived nearly everyone connected to the case. His adopted son, Ichiro, continued fighting for a retrial until his own death in 2013. The Teikoku bank affair leaves you with a particular kind of unease. Not the closure that even the most terrible criminal cases can eventually provide, but a sustained and unresolved weight. 12 people went to work at a bank in western Tokyo on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in January 1948 and never came home. Their deaths were real, the grief of their families was real, the crime itself, the meticulous planning, the false authority, the cold precision of it, happened exactly as the evidence shows. What isn't clear is whether the man who spent 37 years on death row was the man who committed it. The evidence against Hirasawa was circumstantial. His confession was retracted almost immediately. No physical evidence placing him inside the Shiinamachi branch has been publicly established. And behind all of it sits the shadow of Unit 731 and the immunity deal that may have protected the real perpetrator from ever being named. Japan's post-war legal system was new and imperfect, operating under occupation conditions that constrained what could be investigated and who could be charged. The same occupation that brought democratic reforms to Japan also, allegedly, inserted a blind spot into this case, a zone of immunity where investigators were told not to look. The case was officially closed with Hirasawa's death. No alternative suspect was ever charged. The man who walked into Shiinamachi branch on January 26, 1948, and handed out cups of poison was never in any court identified by name. If this story stayed with you, if you want to keep exploring the cases and systems that shaped modern Japan, please consider subscribing. There's much more ahead.